I'm standing in the kitchen as my husband is telling me about my son's science project that they worked on together earlier that day. My Apple Watch buzzes on my wrist. I glance down to see a text from a Cantor my chat group, looking for new repertoire. I look back at my husband. What did you just say? He stares at me, frustrated at my divided attention. When I go for a walk around my neighborhood, I often find myself reading an email or an article or playing Wordle. Sometimes I'm even learning Spanish on Duolingo. How worldly of me. This brings me to the question, if I walked by the burning bush, would I even notice it? This week is not only the first Shabbat of 2024, but it's also the Shabbat when we read the first chapters of the book of Exodus. And this week's Torah portion, Shemot, is packed with some of our most famous stories, the ones we love to tell at Passover. The Israelites are living in Egypt, and the new Pharaoh enslaves them. Moses is saved from the basket on the Nile by Pharaoh's daughter. He grows up and becomes the leader of the Israelites in their pursuit of freedom. What was it about Moses that made him the one for the job of leading the Israelite people? He certainly grew up in unique circumstances. He lived in Pharaoh's court, being raised by Pharaoh's daughter. At the same time, he knew his mother, who nursed him. He knew where he came from. What did it feel like for Moses to lead this double life, to live in a world of privilege while his family members were living as slaves? Rabbi Chaim Stern comments, this double status must have put a severe emotional burden on him. This, added to the insecurity of his own position, made him into a person who was both introspective and sensitive to the thoughts and feelings of others. The foundations for religious receptivity were thus laid in his youth. As Moses grew up, he continued to be aware of those around him. We watch as he killed an Egyptian after witnessing him beating a Hebrew slave. And then the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting, and he asked why one struck the other. When he ran away to the land of Midian, he protected the daughters who had come to the well to draw water from shepherds trying to drive them away. And when he married Zipporah and they had a son, he named his son Gershom, for he said, I have been a ger, a stranger in a foreign land. He was a perpetual stranger wherever he went, not quite fitting in among his Hebrew brothers, in Pharaoh's court, and amongst the Midianites either. And maybe that's what led to his profession as a shepherd, tending the sheep of his father-in-law Jethro. Perhaps Moses felt most comfortable wandering alone among the fields with only the sounds of nature surrounding him. Rabbi Peter Noble described Moses as compassionately vigilant. Perhaps this is the quality that allowed Moses to see the burning bush that was not consumed. In Exodus, we read, when the Eternal saw that Moses had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. He answered, Hineni, here I am. God called out to Moses only after Moses actually took the time to stop and look. When Moses said out loud, I must turn to look at this Mar'eh Hagadol, this marvelous sight. Why doesn't this bush burn up? How often in our own lives do we stop to notice something? And how often do we actually say out loud what we are noticing? I'm reminded of a video I watched of a female Torah scribe called a Soferet. She taught that as she is writing each of the 304,805 letters of the Torah scroll, no more, no less, she says, she must say each word out loud before she writes it. I know when I'm writing a thank you note, I often miss a word or skip ahead without thinking because I'm not focused so intently on each word. Are we capable of such attention? On Sunday mornings, I lead our worship service for the Helfman Religious School with my teen song leaders. It is our custom when we get to the Shema to use sign language while we sing the words. I learned the signs for the Shema from a video by Rabbi Darby Jared Lee, a deaf rabbi in Concord, Mass. For the word Shema, which we think of as hear or listen, Rabbi Lee says he doesn't feel comfortable translating it as relating to the ears. It doesn't make sense to him. The real meaning of the prayer, in my opinion, he says, is to pay attention. So he signs Shema like this. Pay attention. When I pray the Shema, I often will close my eyes, and this helps me to listen more intently to your voices, to the voices of our community. And isn't this one of the reasons for prayer, to help us pay attention? When we pray the Ma'ariv, Aravim, the evening prayer, the language speaks of the light rolling into darkness and darkness rolling into light, that liminal, mysterious time between day and night. Have you stopped lately to notice the colors of the sky at that time? We learn that the Israelites were slaves for 400 years after Jacob came to Egypt to survive the famine. And in this time, the Israelites seem to have lost a connection with God. When we read about their cries of struggle under the cruel hand of Pharaoh, they do not cry out to God specifically. The text states the Israelites were groaning under the bondage and cried out. And their cry for help from bondage rose up to God. And God responds to their cries. We read, God heard their moaning, and God remembered the covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. Rabbi Chaim Stern compares this repetition to the tolling of a bell. God heard, God remembered, God looked, God took notice. The bell tolls of things to come, Rabbi Stern says. Perhaps this bell was a waking up of God to the Israelites' suffering, and also a preview of a new spiritual awakening that we see in the character of Moses. Moses' focus and attention, as well as his empathy for others, leads to a partnership with God to fight for the justice of the Israelite people. As we begin this new year, how can we improve our own attention to the suffering that we may have been ignoring, to the beauty of nature, to the small joys of being with people we love? Let our attention inspire us to be partners with God in healing our world. Shabbat Shalom.